We are arguably in a time when Disney princesses need course correction more than they ever have before. Frozen 2 was a disappointment, Wish was shameful, and I'm one of the few people who liked Raya and the Last Dragon. I don't need reminding that Encanto was a masterpiece, but that represents the exception, not the rule. I think the reason Encanto seems immune to the problems plaguing others is that there's elements being forced across the board that happen to fit with the vision for Encanto. The awkward dork personality works for Mirabel because she's cast as the resident punching bag.
You didn't get a gift?
Mirabel! Then not special, since, you have no gift.
Thanks.
Compare that to Asha from Wish, who doesn't have the same input and input response.
I'm going to explode.
My best friend, the king's apprentice.
My mouth drooping? I feel like it's drooping.
No one treats her like the butt of the joke, so she just acts awkward out of nowhere, and no one works off of that. If Mirabel is playing catch with other characters, then Asha is throwing a ball off a cliff. Another apparently mandatory thing that happens to fit Encanto is the inhuman sidekick role, filled by the living house, which is both unique and plays into the story in a meaningful way. Meanwhile, in Wish, if I ever hear that stupid goat speak one more time, I'm gonna... For legal reasons, most of that sentence has been redacted. And the fact that Mirabel doesn't have love interest doesn't do as much damage as it could have if Mirabel didn't have such a good dynamic with her family to soften the blow. Once again, you can see that everything Encanto does right, Wish does wrong. Asha doesn't have an impactful dynamic with anyone, especially not that stupid goat. And none of you are here to talk about awkwardness or animal sidekicks. You're here because we the people have all been asking, where the prince is at? Why must all the new Disney princesses suffer being single? How could they rob us of new romances? I heard that Wish was originally going to have a love story between Asha and a human-ish version of the star thing. People have been saying that would have been so much better than what we actually got from Wish, and there's no counter-argument because anything would have been better than what we actually got from Wish. There's this misconception floating around that audiences want female heroes who don't need no man. In reality, the minority of people who don't want their female characters to have love interests are man-haters who object to any male character being put in a positive light. And they disguise that prejudice as desire for female empowerment. Normally, the outlandish demands of the hateful few would be ignored. But we live in a time when the hateful few are seen as champions of virtue, so they are taken seriously now. I shouldn't have to point this out because it's something writers have known for uncountable centuries, but the women who they claim to be representing like romance. Men like romance, women like romance, robots like romance. Women like romance so much that they watch dozens of Hallmark Christmas films every year. Women like romance so much that they gave Twilight untold truckloads of cash. Women like romance so much that they still won't let Grey's Anatomy die. These levels of success for such romance-focused franchises aimed at a female audience wouldn't be possible if women wanted their female characters to be single. And I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, obviously, is MVP going to tell us 2 + 2 is 4 next? And to that I say it's obvious to you and me, but Disney is a company that has built vast empires around love stories, and they still need to be reminded of this common knowledge. In the last 10 years, not one new Disney princess has had love interest. Anna in Frozen 2 doesn't count because she was introduced before that 10-year period. Moana, Elena, Raya, Mirabel, and Asha are all single. That's a problem. Let's talk about how the older Disney princesses were better for having romance. Better yet, let's start at the beginning. When the uninitiated hear the words Disney Prince, their minds go to the first 3, the nameless Prince Charmings, the so-called corpse kissers. The original three are not the prime examples of Disney princes done right, but they're not as bad as people say they are. They were written with fairy tale logic, and a lot is left to the audience's imagination to fill in. The child logic leads to questions like, how did the characters fall in love so deeply so quickly, when the answer is the same way Whoville simulates normal gravity despite being small enough to fit on a speck. As for the gaps for imagination, oftentimes imagination assumes the worst, and those worst assumptions have defined the reputations of Disney princes. At least the reputations in the eyes of those who haven't seen the later films. There's also the fact that the older Disney princess films had the prince save the princess, but didn't have the princess save the prince, which some take issue with. Fast forward to Disney's Renaissance. The Little Mermaid introduced Eric, who set a new standard for the Disney princes and their relationships with princesses. Eric had more screen time, more interaction with Ariel, and they each got to save the other. Ariel got to save Eric from drowning, and Eric got to save Ariel from Ursula. Can you imagine if they had Ariel kill Ursula instead? That would be so uneven. I think Mulan and Shang are another good example of both characters having something to brag about. They both learn from the other, and they both play a critical role in defeating the Hun army. The other romances in the Disney Princess Renaissance had their flaws, but they still struck a chord with people, arguably more so than the original three. I think Tiana and Naveen proved especially well that romance and princes are what Disney princess fans like, because Naveen and his relationship with Tiana is remembered fondly even though the movie they were in crashed and burned. And we all know the ultimate example of Disney princess romance. The one that got the focus of the story, held up to modern standards, and executed it all with great writing. Rapunzel and Flynn/Eugene are the best, and it's undeniable that Tangled wouldn't be what it is if it wasn't for Flynn/Eugene. Disney princess films are fairy tales that inspire hope because they end with a happily ever after to tell the children, and yes, the adults, that their lives aren't going to stay miserable forever. Disney princesses start out in positions of depravity and loneliness, but always find a way to a happily ever after. That's something that a lot of people need to see. And for the vast majority of people, a happily ever after includes romance. That's ingrained into human nature, and that's not going to change just because it's current year. So any Disney princess happily ever after that doesn't have romance is going to feel incomplete no matter what. Frozen introduced Elsa, a Disney princess with no love interest, and the first thing people did was pretend she falls in love with Jack Frost from Rise of the Guardians. The second thing they did was petition for Elsa to get a lesbian relationship in Frozen 2. I think that Disney learned the wrong lesson from Elsa. Elsa stands out from other Disney princesses because her personality is so different. She goes more deeply into themes such as self-loathing. Meanwhile, I immediately identified Anna as a lesser copy of Rapunzel. So Disney somehow looked at these two characters, one of which unfortunately didn't have love interest, but made up for it by being unique, and the other of which was unfortunately a carbon copy, adorable, awkward person, but made up for it by having a love interest. And they decided that from then on out, they would only make characters that are unfortunately carbon copied, adorable, awkward people who unfortunately have no love interests. Now, I will do something seldom done. I'm going to present the other side of the argument. Too often, people act as if their side of the argument is the only respectable one, leading only to division and never to understanding. Also, if I don't counter these arguments, people will consider this video invalid. So here's a clone of me to disagree with. Hello! Alright, MVP clone. Tell me why you think Disney princesses don't need romance. Well, I don't. Everybody loves Disney princes. Yes, but I need an intellectual debate. Oh, well, what about empowerment through independence? The early Disney princesses were made to be damsels in distress in their own movies. Well, the men got to be the heroes. Girls need stories where they get to save the day too. If we insist on all Disney princesses having their princes, how will girls know that they're strong enough to be heroes, even without a boyfriend? You say you don't want girls portrayed as weak by letting them do things on their own, but everybody needs help sometimes, and to say otherwise sets unreasonable standards. The truly damaging message would be telling girls that companionship is weakness, telling them that relationships are for chumps, and if they can't do everything themselves, they're not good enough. You risk the opposite extreme. If girls are only shown girls being successful, if they're in loving relationships, they'll think that they're useless until they have that special someone. Most of the Disney princess films with romance included women who were capable while single. People say that the first 3 Disney princess films portrayed women as weak, but they all had women in positions of power. Sleeping Beauty had a trio of female fairies who saved Prince from a woman with terrible power. Cinderella had a fairy godmother and a stepmother with an iron fist. Snow White ends up with her prince, but she commands authority while he's away. When she says wash up, the dwarves say Snow White knows best. The idea of these romances portraying women as powerless without their lovers is just made up. What about Merida? You mean the Disney princess from the mediocre film where she has no love interest and later got a really good book with a love interest for her? Is that your example of Disney princesses not needing romance? No. As the original, I declare myself to be the winner of this argument, and for your crimes of disagreeing with me, you will be burned slowly in the incinerator. But I was just doing the one thing you created me to do. I'm just kidding, I'm not gonna burn you. If I had an incinerator big enough for a person, I would find for legal reasons, most of that sentence has been redacted, and then pretend the ashes are family members. I'm glad you don't have a person-sized incinerator. A lot of people are. But if I won't be incinerated, what will I do with my post-purpose existence? Go play video games. Okay. So remember to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, and if you happen to have a person-sized incinerator, I would like, for legal reasons, most of that sentence has been redacted.